We're live. Morning, all. Call this meeting to order. I do want to have our condolence go out to Al Smith for the loss of his father in Scotland, and it's just a double whammy with this with the virus as well as the loss of his father at the same time. And so, Al, our prayers and thoughts go out to you and your family. So. Next order of business is disclosure of the general nature thereof. Seeing none, the minutes from June 9th. Any errors or omissions? Mover and seconder of the minutes, then, please.
Purcell.
Moved by Purcell, seconder.
Jones.
By Marks, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabon.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. I need a motion to move into the whole, committee of the whole. Mover and seconder, please.
Martin moves.
Moved by Martin, seconder.
French. Here.
Second by French, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabon.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. First on the order is the plan of subdivision for Little Creeks. Nancy, you're doing this one?
Good morning, everyone, and through you, Warden, to members of council. Final approval was recently given to this plan of subdivision, which is within the former village of Port Stanley, now the municipality of Central Elgin. It's located off of East Street, south of Hill Street. The subdivision is also known as Little Creek and is comprised of multiple unit types, actually single detached, semi-detached, as well as future townhouse. And I believe there's slated to be a seniors apartments or seniors facility as well on the site. Final approval was actually given on June 12th of this year. And I think that everything's pretty self-explanatory, but if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Thank you, Nancy. Questions for Nancy on the Little Creek subdivision? Seeing none, there's a recommendation to receive and file. So mover and seconder, please.
Jones.
I'm sorry.
Marks.
Moved by Jones, second by Marks. All in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabon.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Michelle, you doing the next one?
I am. Thank you, Mr. Warden, through you to members of council. Before you report on the homes MSA, so the Multi-Sector Service Accountability Agreement, Schedule G, which is the form of compliance declaration. So the Corporation of the County of Elgin does have an MSA in place with the Southwest LIN, and it does require an annual declaration of compliance, Schedule G, that really just speaks to the obligations of the MSA having been fulfilled. So those reporting requirements for specific reports related to performance are occupancy and compliance. To the best of staff's knowledge, the St. Thomas Elgin Adult Day Program has satisfied the requirements of Schedule D or G, and we do recommend that this form be signed. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Questions for Michelle on the agreement? Seeing none, mover and second on the recommendation, please.
McPhail.
Moved by McPhail, seconder.
Ketchabon.
Second by Ketchabon. All in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Marks,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba,
Yes.
and Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Brian, you're doing the next one?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Warden, through you to council. This report informs council that we've had to temporarily suspend our e-waste partnership with Green E-Recycling and the Steam Center based in St. Thomas. The bins will be removed from the 5 branches that are listed in the report shortly, but we do hope that the program will be up and running as soon as September. The program has had good intake recently as a result of the pandemic. I think people clearing out their houses in the early weeks of this. And so we're hoping to get this program back up and running because it is being well utilized. I also want to stress that the public does have an option to continue to donate to the program, and that is directly to the Steam Center in St. Thomas. We will be notifying our municipal partners about this temporary suspension. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Brian. Questions for Brian? Seeing none, mover and seconder for the recommendation, please.
Jones, I'll move.
Martin.
Moved by Jones, second by Martin, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail,
Yes.
Counselor Purcell,
Yes.
Counselor Martin,
Yes.
Counselor Marks,
Yes.
Counselor Jones,
Yes.
Counselor French,
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer,
Yes.
Counselor Ketchiba,
Yes.
and Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Amy, you're doing telework?
Yes, Mr. Warden. Good morning, Warden and members of County Council. Before Council is a new human resources policy related to remote or telework arrangements. At the outset of COVID-19 and the local state of emergency, when many staff were quickly redeployed to work remotely, the management team did develop a set of emergency telework guidelines with an associated agreement that these staff signed off on. The attached policy and agreement are to formalize the requirements of a safe and productive telework arrangement as the global pandemic continues to impact our operations, and so that we have this in place for future use if and when necessary. While developing the new policy, of significant concern were health and safety compliance, including office ergonomics, lowering risk and liability for the corporation, and information security and privacy. Research was facilitated in order to ensure that these items were sufficiently covered within the new policy. In addition to the policy and agreement, HR has developed office ergonomics online training, as well as remote office health and safety inspection form and process to ensure remote workers are complying with health and safety requirements. Does council have any questions on the policy and agreement?
Thank you, Amy. Questions for Amy on telework?
Mr. Warden, that's Dominique.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. So this is, again, well-researched and well-prepared. So just a couple of clarifications and comments. In the agreement, it talks about that the agreement will conclude when normal operations resume. So can you expand on that a little bit? So would everything need to be back to normal? What if there's something else that's still not back to normal in my life that's related to the pandemic, but the operations of the office are back to normal? How does that work?
Likely what you'd be referring to would be an accommodation request. So if a staff member does have childcare, other family care responsibilities that are not ending at the time that we are resuming normal operations and putting out a request for staff to return to the office environment. So accommodation requests are considered on a case-by-case basis. If staff are able to continue to work productively remotely, we could consider extending the remote work, or there are a number of statutory leaves that staff would then be eligible for. And again, we would consider those on a case-by-case basis.
That makes sense. I did also have a comment, if I may, Mr. Warden. A bit of concern just because of the eligibility. There is one line that refers to prior performance. And I know that in some HR circles, this criteria was highly criticized, mainly because that was something that Facebook did. And there was a really high risk of stigma, whereby all those who would be stuck in the office would be labeled with being the poor performers, and those at home would be rewarded and be labeled the ones being the good workers. And I have to agree with some of the points that were raised in those discussions, because if there's an issue of poor performance, whether you're at the office or at home, the issue remains, and it needs to be dealt with. So I really would personally prefer for that to be rewarded in some ways, and that not be part of the criteria. Like performance, I agree, you need to continue to perform regardless, but prior performance is not what qualifies you.
Thank you, Councillor Jaguar, for those comments. I think that the line is in there in order to speak to trust. We need to make sure we have a good, solid, trusting relationship with staff. But we did have a good discussion with management team about exactly what you're referencing now as well, and that it shouldn't be looked at as punitive or a punishment for poor performance that individuals are in the office, that our regular performance management processes should be ongoing, whether you're in the office or working remotely. So we can amend that to be clear that way within the policy, so that it doesn't come across as a punishment for all performance issues.
Right. I think that would be best. And I know from another board there was also a suggestion of sending a photo of the work area as far to help define the space, and I mean for liability purposes, and to also help for some feedback on ergonomics. And that might be something you would consider.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions for Amy? Seeing none, there's a recommendation, receive and file. Mover and seconder, please.
I'll move.
Moved by Jaguar, second by Marks, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell. Councillor Marks.
Yes.
I assume you mean.
Yes. Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Central Elgin's covered. Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor Jaguar.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Alan, are you and Jim doing a tag team in this next one?
Yes, Mr. Warden, I will start this off, and Jim will then add to my comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, as mentioned, Jim and I had virtually attended the Canada's Rural and Remote Broadband Conference on June the 8th and the 9th. This provides some really good insight into some of the challenges in providing rural broadband and some of the deployment options. Now, the conference did begin on a very positive note, with Minister Monsef announcing the government will be opening a universal broadband fund to applications. Now, various deployment options for broadband were discussed for local government, and Appendix 1 of the report does provide a pretty list of some of the options. Now, having local government establishing their own fiber or wireless networks and making them available on an open access utility basis to service all providers seem to be the preferred option for meeting the rural broadband challenge mentioned by the panelists. It's interesting, a panelist provided an interesting analogy that should be mentioned between the development of roads and the automobile to the current situation with broadband. For example, if Ford and GM each built their own roads 100 years ago, then only Ford cars could Ford roads. The public has been better served by the road network being publicly owned, allowing all makes of cars to travel on it. So likewise, presenters argued that a publicly owned broadband network that all ISPs could access means that ISPs will not have to build their own broadband backbone along another ISP's backbone. So this public approach avoids duplication and enables smaller ISPs to compete in the market. Panelists also discussed the advantages of fiber versus wireless. Fiber is more expensive, yes. However, the lifespan of fiber is greater than 50 years, while wireless is out of date and whatever. So I'm going to hand it to Jim, who can apply this to the Elgin experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan.
What I'll present now is just a rough example to give council an idea of what the impact would be of making an investment into a fiber network and put some consideration into whether or not there's value behind that. As Alan said, the fiber provides you a 50-year lifespan. That does provide, because of the cost of fiber though, there is a hesitancy for ISPs to invest too heavily just simply because they don't have the financial capacity to do so. However, with municipalities and our access to low-cost loans through Infrastructure Ontario, we have greater ability to do so. It all depends, of course, on the individual municipality and the room they have in their annual repayment limit. As you all know from what we presented at budget time, we're looking at taking on about $35 million over the next 3 years in debt. That represents only about a third of our total annual repayment limit. So there's still lots of capacity there, and the ARL would not be a restricting factor for us. From the SWIFT presentation that you had previously, you saw that we have 1,850 kilometers of underserved areas. And SWIFT was planning on addressing 22% of that. That would still leave 1,400 kilometers that would be underserved. From the session that we attended, they were suggesting that the average cost for installing fiber is about $30,000 per kilometer. You compare that just to put it into perspective, when we do roads, that's about $500,000 a kilometer. So it's a much more affordable investment than the roads that we currently invest in. Now, if we take that 1,400 kilometers and we multiply that by the $30,000, that would mean that we would need somewhere in the magnitude of about $40 to $50 million to complete installing fiber throughout the county. Given the 50-year lifespan of fiber, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say that we would spread this investment over a 30-year lifespan, meaning taking on a 30-year loan in order to minimize the annual payments. Such a loan would cost about $2 million annually to service. The conference was suggesting that about half of the investment we could probably recover through service fees. In this example, I was more conservative and I used a 40% factor that would be covered between grants and service fees. So of the $2 million that I mentioned previously, that would mean that really the net cost would be $1.2 million that would have to be serviced by local ratepayers. And if we were to put in an incremental levy going forward over the next 10 years of 1/3%, we would be able to cover that $1.2 million of incremental debt service costs. Difficult to predict. However, it's not unreasonable to say that if that degree of fiber investment was made in Elgin County, that you would see incremental growth happening in our area, as businesses would be attracted to come here and invest because of the high-speed broadband that we would be providing. And that could then very well offset the proposed increases in levy. So those are very rough figures, but it's just something to consider as we move forward and the Broadband Committee deliberates next steps. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Jim. Questions for either Jim or Al on their perspective, potential perspective going forward.
Mr. Warden, it's Grant.
Go ahead, Grant.
Just more of a comment. It seems that it's something that we should be able to attain. Like back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we had the Fingal Telephone Exchange, the Shedden Telephone Company. Every community had its own telephone company, and they put the backbone for telephone in before Bell took over. It seems like we should be able to replicate that again. It seems like they put telephone lines down every road in the county and the whole country, and made it work. So I don't see why we can't do it too at this point, because the technology in the past 70 years or so is, I would say, the implications of cost would be relatively the same per household, you would think.
Thanks, Grant. Any other questions for either Jim or Al?
Hi, it's Bob Purcell. I just want to thank Jim for making it simple to understand and also giving us a practical solution going forward rather than a lot of chit chat. I'm very comfortable leaving it with our broadband committee, and they'll come back with proper recommendations as we move along. But as Grant just pointed out, I think this thing looks real now, that we can maybe find a solution. Some of us old folks even remember when you didn't have hydro down every line. So, and that still exists to some degree today, but not nearly as much as broadband, and it's just as important.
Thanks, Bob. Any other questions or comments?
Sally?
Go ahead, Sally.
Just one of my concerns has been with, I agree totally with it. I think the fiber is important. The biggest problem is a lot of farms have houses way back in from the road, and fiber won't go more than 200, 250 feet. So I just wonder how we will help those people access this high speed if we're going to put all this in place. And just one other thing I will bring up, and I was going to bring it up under urgent business, but right now we had an incident here in Sparta 2 weeks ago where a person's house caught fire. They evacuated and they took their cell phone so they could call 911, because of course the landline was already dysfunctioning when they were awakened in the middle of the night. But they had no cell phone reception, no cell phone service. And I think that is a matter of urgency, that we need to get it. I mean, they lost their house as a result. It was a small fire when they went out, but because of it had to be large enough for a neighboring farmer to see it in the middle of the night before the fire department could be called. And that is a serious concern as far as I'm concerned. There are lots of pockets of Elgin County that have very poor cell phone service, and I think we need to do a study on that and make sure that we do have cell phone service everywhere, and it might fit in with this connectivity committee.
Thanks, Sally. Any questions or comments, or Jim or Al?
No, I think it's something we can take back to the committee.
Okay. Any other comments on the broadband? Seeing none, I think the committee is going to be very busy, but I thank you, Jim and Al, for presenting that. It gives us some hope for the future. So I need a mover and seconder for the recommendation, please.
Purcell.
Moved by Purcell, seconder.
Jiguer.
Second by Jiguer, all in favor.
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks. Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabon.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Jim, you're doing budget performance?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Mr. Warden. For May, the performance was an unfavorable $21,000. That brings the year-to-date to a still very favorable $273,000. In corporate services, you'll see negative performance of $66,000. That's the result of an unbudgeted legal settlement. With the homes, there's slight negative performance. That's the result of the COVID expenses being slightly higher than the cost that we've have received, or the revenue we have received from the province. In addition to that, in corporate activities, there were also further COVID expenses at the corporate level of about $12,000. As I said, that brings our total year to date to a favorable $273,000. With the next month, when I bring in this report, we'll be focusing in on the discussions of, or the impacts of COVID on the June county levy. Don't have any final numbers there yet, but initial indications from our local municipal partners is showing that the impact is actually less than what we initially anticipated. So it may be a better outcome than previously forecasted. Thank you, Mr. Warden.
Thank you, Jim. I'm quite pleased with our results. I think we're in an enviable position compared to a lot of our neighbors, but is there a train coming at the end of this tunnel that we should be aware of, Jim?
The only potential train would be the write down at the end of the year. But again, based on what we're seeing at the local municipal partners, those that had earlier levy payments in May and early June, the amounts that they're collecting are not that dissimilar from normal levels. So write downs might be slightly higher, but the last forecast that I showed you about 6 weeks ago did include higher write-offs, so I don't expect anything severe.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Question for Jim on budget. Seeing none, can I have a mover and seconder for the presentation, please?
Ketchabaugh.
Moved by Ketchabaugh, seconder. Second by Jones, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabaugh.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Brian, you're doing the Curry Road intersection review?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to County Council, as directed by County Council at its last meeting, for staff to document the cost of installing traffic signals at the intersection and the cost of installing a four-way stop condition along with reduced speed limit. The report details those costs before you. A review of the newly collected data utilizing updated traffic count data has confirmed that the previous study's findings that a signalized intersection is still unfortunately not warranted. A four-way stop condition was also assessed for the intersection, and traffic volumes were also insufficient to warrant an all-way stop. In the spirit of cooperation, a policy exists to permit local municipalities to install pedestrian crossover facilities at their cost on county roads where they are not technically warranted. County Council may choose to extend this privilege to include intersection signalization or implement a four-way stop condition on a trial basis whereby such solutions aren't otherwise technically warranted. With that, I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Brian. Just as is the process, we need to receive and file Brian's report, and then Councillor Purcell has a notice of motion in regard to this Curry Road intersection after this. So first we'll deal with the questions to Brian on his report. Any questions? We need a motion to receive and file. Moved by Jones, second by Purcell, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail. Councillor Purcell. Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchiba,
Yes.
and Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Councillor Purcell, you have a notice of motion?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Warden. As anticipated, Brian's report, he just confirmed what we were all probably aware of, but he went back and did a very thorough re-examination, and more importantly, came up with some prices for us. When we last discussed this, Councillor Grant and Duncan, they both pointed out that the last time we did a four-way or an intersection on Highway 3 down by Iona, it was a direct result of a fatality. We don't really want to wait that long. As Brian pointed out in his report, County Council may choose to extend the privilege for us to put in a four-way stop on a trial basis. And on that basis, I'd like to make the following motion: that a pilot project be undertaken to install a four-way stop and appropriate speed reductions at the Curry Road Talbot Line in Dutton Dunwich with a review in 1 year. I'd like to add that the review will determine the effectiveness of these safety measures, which may be extended at least until the major reconstruction of Highway 401 is completed and this critical EDR is not as busy. So I'd like to make that motion if somebody would be willing to second it.
Thank you, Bob. A motion by Purcell, seconder?
Ketchiba.
Second by Ketchiba. Any comments, questions?
This, Mr. Warden's Grant.
Go ahead, Grant.
I just, yes, our signal in Iona was put in because of the fatality. Has it worked out the way we hoped it would? I would say the jury's out on that, Bob, Councilor Purcell. When we do have EDR, 401 shut down and the EDR comes down Iona Road, it tends to put traffic jams up anyway with the transports especially, and as soon as that happens, it just forces them onto the township roads to try and bypass the EDR. Tolleville with the stoplights there. Normally, every time we have something happen on the 401, you end up with OPP sitting at that intersection trying to direct traffic. To be able to do it, it just creates other problems afterwards. You might fix one thing, but create 5 other problems. Just what we've seen in Southwold. It's not everything is perfect. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Grant. Any other comments or questions?
Mr. Warden, if I may address that just for Grant. I agree, and I agree, and that is why we're looking at just a trial with a very modest investment. Also, we are working simultaneously with the Ministry of Transportation. In fact, they're coming down in 2 weeks. We have a scheduled meeting with them. They're looking at trying to figure a better EDR that doesn't run through the municipalities like yourself and ourselves. And they think they might have some solutions, but I'm not going to promise what's going to happen with them till we go through that exercise. But this would give us something in the interim that will help safety and on a temporary basis.
Was there any other question? Go ahead, Duncan.
I'm personally not a great fan of four-way stops. I have until I got used to the one in Dutton that appeared on a road that I'd never seen one before. I think I drove through it twice without paying any attention to the four-way stop. My question, I think, is to Steve. You know, we have staff that are recommending that it is not warranted to put a four-way stop at that intersection. And per chance that something traumatic was to happen at that intersection because of the four-way stop, would we put ourselves in a legal situation that someone that was wishing to sue us would would say, well, your staff told you it wasn't warranted, you put it in anyway, and you were a direct cause of an accident or a fatality? Do we leave ourselves open to that litigation?
Potential liability. The primary liability would fall to the owner and operator of any vehicle that disobeyed a sign. I think that that's why you would certainly have appropriate signage. So I can't say that you would. I can't say that there wouldn't be any liability. It certainly wouldn't be primary. It wouldn't be a primary liability.
Well, usually in these situations, they always go for the deep pockets, and that's usually the municipality. So you pretty much can be assured that you're going to be named in the suit. And depending on the justice sitting hearing the case, you really have no idea where it might end up.
Well, there'd be no doubt that you would be likelihood in the way in the society we live in right now, you are going to be named. You are going probably, if there's joint and several liability, our insurer tends to then be the one who could be called upon to pay out, and then there would have to be a division of liability among the defendants. So that's where I'm saying that there wouldn't necessarily be primary liability, and a court would have to make a division of liability.
Thanks, Steve. Bob, just to clarify, I see the estimate is $5,000. Who's exactly paying for this? Is there a portion that is distributed, or is the county paying for all of this, or what are you suggesting?
I said it should fall back on the municipality, but I'd be more than happy to have the county pick up the tab on it. This is not a huge amount of money for either. It's much more significant for a small municipality like us than it is for the county. But if we get a solution in place, it is a temporary one, and I suspect some of the things we've talked about might come true. But at least it will make everybody feel a lot more comfortable and probably make it a little safer in the short term, so we can look for more permanent solutions to this problem. And as Steve pointed out, he knows from my personal background that whenever these things happen, it wouldn't matter what we did, we're going to get sued anyway. And the insurance companies will eventually solve all those problems, but that's just a process that we go through in today's world.
So just to clarify, the Dutton which is on the tab for this one?
I didn't volunteer that in the motion.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Well, that's completely up to what county council wants to do. They can modify the motion to clarify it, or they can leave it as it is, and we'll work that out with Brian over due course.
I think we need to have that clarified before we vote on this motion, because as Brian said, the municipality could take this under consideration at their expense. So I think we need to clarify that, Bob.
As a mover of the motion, then if you if we pass this motion, it has to go back to Dutton Dunwich for approval of the financing of the project.
Okay, so everyone clear on what the motion is then? Dominique?
Just one more question. Because this is a trial basis and you're looking at the effectiveness, I wanted to know what would be deemed effective. So, or maybe it's a question for Brian. What will we be monitoring over the course of the trial?
The review is going to entail several multiple hour site visits over several days to confirm Number one, that people are abiding by the stop condition. Further traffic counts will be undertaken to compare and confirm that people are abiding by the posted speed limits. There'll be several factors in that regard that will be monitored.
So we can take into account what Councillor Jones was saying, that it caused other issues and maybe traffic jams in a case of an EDR situation, so we could take that into account as well.
Well, certainly timing staff presence in the field when an EDR is underway is difficult to do. So we'll certainly be engaging our local partners to garner their feedback and observation as well. So it'll be multi-prong approach in that regard.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Elgin.
Mr. Warden. Question for Brian: that could this be done in a kind of a segment process that we do have the technology? If in Wallacestown we were initially to change the speed in the hamlet, and we do have the technology to be able to monitor that speed and see if people are paying attention that there is now a different speed zone hamlet before we put the stop signs up, because if traffic is not going to pay any attention to the difference in the speed zone, are they going to pay any attention to the four-way stop?
Yeah, certainly deployment of the solution in whole or part could be implemented at various stages. Speed reduction through the hamlet is likely a logical first step. That could be monitored, but certainly before an always stop condition is implemented. For the reasons noted in the report, as well as Council's commentary, there certainly is some implications associated with an always stop in terms of stacking during an EDR. There may be observations and further commentary expressed by local residents as a result of that as well. So certainly solutions can be implemented in whole or in part over time.
Any other questions for either Brian or Bob?
Mr. Warden?
Go ahead.
I'm sympathetic to this request. Last night at Central Elgin Council under new business, I introduced a topic, I guess, of traffic concerns. And we have been inundated with complaints, and it's speed, congestion, all kinds of things. So I have a high regard for the skill of staff in the report. But one thing, when they go out and they view it, it's a snapshot. When we get what I call very genuine complainers, but concerned citizens, and multiple ones, have a problem out there. I'm not familiar with the Dutton. I haven't been to Dutton in 6 months, unfortunately, so I have to take the local citizens. They're the ones that are there observing it every day. I'm not, but I see the ones in Central Elgin on a daily basis. We have a huge problem with traffic and it's speed, congestion, all kinds of things. So I am sympathetic to this. A trial basis, I'll probably be supporting it, but I want to assure that I have a lot of respect for staff. It's just that the county is so big, it's hard for staff to see it on a daily basis like the citizens do.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Any other questions or comments? Well, we have a motion by Purcell and moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Julie, you're doing the Western Wardens, Swift?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of County Council. This report presents the details of the special meeting held by Western Ontario Wardens Caucus, which was called on Thursday, June the 4th. The Western Wardens reviewed a set of recommendations for the future of the Western Wardens investment in high-speed fiber. Accompanying the report is a presentation that was provided and shared with Western Wardens members. And I've also attached minutes which detail the meeting, including 6 recommendations which were approved by Western Wardens. In addition to the decision to support SWIFT 2.0, the Western Wardens have a plan to advocate for our region's fair share of the CRTC's $750 million broadband fund. So Western Wardens and our member counties and local municipalities should really be advocating for 10% or $75 million of the funding, as our region represents 10% of the population of Canada. Western Wardens should also advocate for the region's fair share of innovation, science, economic development, the ISED fund, which is $1.7 billion of universal broadband fund. So applications for that fund are opening up this year, and Western Wardens should once again be advocating for 10% or $170 million for Southwestern Ontario based on our population. And that advocacy is over and above any sort of SWIFT contribution or funding request. Southwestern Ontario was previously left out of the Connect to Innovate funding, and this really shouldn't happen again. So we should be advocating for rural Southwestern Ontario's fair share of those pots of money. So we are undertaking a letter writing campaign on behalf of Western Wardens, and you'll find that 2 draft letters are included with the report today. And the recommendations are that you receive and file this report, as well that you consent to having the warden send out those advocacy letters. And with that, the warden and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Julie. Questions for Julie on the recommendation?
Just a very brief clarification. I assume that the warden will write each municipality asking them specifically to send a letter, and that way we don't have to pull it out of the report.
Yes, we can pass that on to all the municipalities for support. Any other questions or comments? Mover and seconder for the recommendation.
Very happy to move the report.
Moved by Mark, seconder.
Jones.
Second by Jones, all in favor.
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yeah.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. And Julie, are you doing the Green Lane Committee?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Through you to members of County Council, before you is a report that addresses a vacancy on the Green Lane Landfill Public Liaison Committee. And while the report itself is fairly self-explanatory, I'd like to once again acknowledge Elsie Hutchins' support of Elgin County through her role on this committee over a number of years. This report suggests appointing a staff member, specifically the county engineer, onto the Green Lane Committee. There was a period of time where it was a staff member, then it went to a citizen appointee. We are recommending it go back to a staff member at the request of Councillor Jones. So the terms of reference recommendations are before you. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Julie. Questions for Julie on the Liaison Committee?
Mr. Ordinance Grant.
Go ahead, Grant.
More of a comment. I'm glad that we have a staff member willing to do it. It's not always been that case in the past. It's not a glorious committee, but it's one that is essential to the operation of South-Old and Elgin County, and basically a watchdog to the landfill. So I'm very happy that Brian said he would sit on the committee, and Elsie has been a great part of South-Old and Elgin County for many, many years, and we're sorry we've lost her, but I'm very happy to see staff interested in getting back on.
Thanks, Grant. Any other questions or comments? See none, mover and seconder for the report, please.
I'll move. Giguère.
Moved by Giguère, seconder.
French.
Second by French. All in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail. Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Correspondence, we have 5 items on correspondence. Anyone wish to make comments, questions? No burning issues. We motion to receive and file, please.
Moved by Martin.
Moved by Martin, seconder.
Jones.
Second by Jones. All in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Giguère.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes.
9-0, the motion is carried.
Thank you. Items for the consent agenda. Statement inquiries by members. Notice of motion. Matters of urgency. Steve, have you got something? No, he's muted.
Okay, here we go. We've received a couple of inquiries regarding temporary licensed patios on or adjacent to, but within the county road allowance. We had, I believe the county engineer can confirm, I think that there has been an inquiry for Bridge Street in Port Stanley, I think Pioneer Road, and one other. In any event, this whole issue of temporary licensed patios came up as a result of changes and amendments to the Liquor License Act during Stage 2 recovery for the economy as an accommodation to primarily to restaurateurs who are still unable to service dine-in patrons. So I think that there should be some interest in accommodating these types of requests to assist local businesses. But before we do that, I thought that I would at least provide some insight into some of the factors that you should be considering. So I have before you on the screen a memo that I put together. The first part relates to what are the Alcohol and Gaming Commission requirements or directives through the legislation or its regulations. So it allows for extension of existing licensed patios or adds new patios within an approved period, and that's up to January 1st, 2021. It would be my recommendation that any permission that we allow be subject to the further limitation of the opening of the dine-in patrons into restaurants. So it'd be the earlier of those dates. We're not going to, I wouldn't suggest that we allow the creation of new temporary licensed patios on an ongoing basis. The physical extension must be adjacent to the premises which are licensed. There's no objection from the local municipality. The licensee is able to demonstrate sufficient control over physical extension. There is no condition on the existing license prohibiting a patio, and that the new or extended patio does not exceed an area that allows for 1.1 square meters per person. Those are the statutory requirements. There is the province has waived its fees for the extension, and the licensee need not submit documentation to the Alcohol Gaming Commission, but must produce it if demanded. Those relate to municipalities having the discretion to require whatever documentation it thinks necessary. Servers can carry alcohol over non-licensed areas to get to the temporary patio. The maximum capacity applicable to the existing patio space will continue to apply, so they can't accommodate more or try to put more on the existing patio. And the 1.1 square meters applies to any new area. Social distancing requirements must be satisfied. From a municipal perspective, there should be some recognition that there's a different situation between an extension or a new patio onto municipal lands or onto private lands. So we're dealing, I'm directing your mind to the extension onto our property, whether or not it's own property, or usually we're talking about a road allowance. Local municipalities should have established or should be establishing or considering establishing standards for extensions onto private property, and that should provide some guidance to what the requirements would be for extension onto upper tier properties and road allowances. There are a few considerations that I think that you should give some thought to. Firstly, do you support the concept of temporary patios on county-owned property, including road allowances and sidewalks? I have to tell you, and this follows on comments regarding the four-way stop sign issue, you are inviting liability by allowing this type of activity on our property. I think that we should be seeking some input from our own insurer as to whether or not coverages should be increased or not. If you do support the concept, the following factors again are suggested for consideration. Firstly, what standards have been adopted by the local municipalities, and are we satisfied with those standards, or do we require additional standards? Does the proposed design incorporate lands such as rolled shoulders, sidewalks, which force pedestrian traffic towards vehicular traffic? I'm very concerned if you start using rolled shoulders or sidewalks that bring patrons on the patio closer to vehicular traffic, and also that force pedestrian traffic into the road. Does the temporary patio design create accessibility issues? Obviously, there should be full compliance with rules and regulations regarding accessibility. Is there any incompatibility of an outdoor patio with neighboring uses? That's really a local issue, but it's still something that I think that we should give some consideration to. Again, I think that the permission, if we give permission, should end when in-house dining is allowed. And if there is interest in this kind of thing, we should have a formal agreement which identifies parties, terms of any license, what to do about a license fee, certainly full compliance with federal, provincial, and municipal regulatory requirements, including those of social distancing, indemnity and save harmless agreements, insurance requirements. And I would also be suggesting that the local municipality should also execute the agreement. For instance, in the Bridge Street, the Central Elgin is actually the primary occupant of the area that is proposed for an extension. So those are the factors. I can tell you that I think that this is a very time-limited activity, but it does attract some risk, and there will be the necessity of an agreement. And a draft agreement is already prepared and available, given the short time frame that we'd probably be working with.
I think we owe it to our local businesses to accommodate them as much as possible. And this is one area where we can help. And I think we can do this without a fee. But obviously there is concerns, and we need to have all our bases covered. But I hope that staff can deal with the requests by the individuals, and we can come to a solution where they can open for business in these other areas. But I will open it to questions or comments from any of the council members.
I would like to speak.
Mr. Warden, it's Bob Purcell. I agree that Steve's right on track to get this out as quick as possible. However, I think you have to expand it to cover more than licensed facilities. We already have ice cream stands that are putting a couple chairs out on county sidewalks and things like that. You will find that people will find a way to have sidewalk sales, even if they're a clothing store, because that's what people are doing now. They're pretty desperate to try to get some sales going. So if we just expand it, I think all the rules you're pointing out are more than appropriate, but just make it universal. So anybody encroaching upon county property or municipal property, and if you channel these through the individual municipalities, a temporary permit could be issued very easily, clearly labeled as a temporary permit that meets the standards set by the county and may be augmented by the local municipality on individual situations.
Thanks, Bob. Sally, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment. The one on Bridge Street in Port Stanley, of course, right now Bridge Street isn't functioning much, and the people, this group were hoping to move out onto the sidewalk. We've already granted them permission to use some of our area to expand, but they were hoping to use the sidewalk in the parking area to make this feasible. And it would be a great place to sit and watch the bridge construction, because it's down beyond even the side street that comes in. So there would be literally no traffic there other than possibly construction traffic. And so I know we have been asking Brian to consider even allowing the street to be closed on weekends and more things out in the street. So I certainly am in favor of this. I think our groups, we've granted 2 patio things already, and I think our businesses need this kind of help right now. And I do agree it's temporary.
Thanks, Sally. Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Warden, it's Grant.
Go ahead, Grant.
I guess my only concern, and I do support this, but I think there needs to be some sort of regulation or I guess policing. If you're on a sidewalk, blocking the sidewalk, and people have to go out into parking spots or onto the gravel portion of the road, I have a bit of a problem with that. There must be some sort of amount of area that's covered on a sidewalk and not go over that, because otherwise you're putting pedestrian traffic at risk. And we need some sort of a guideline for staff to look at before they grant wholeheartedly every application that comes in.
I think that would be part of the agreement between the individual business and the county. So certainly I agree with you, Grant. You can't block off the traffic, but that would have to be part of the agreement. Any other questions?
Just one comment, if I could. Sidewalks are actually a local asset. So I think that that's why I want to make sure that there are standards for in the local municipality in respect of sidewalks.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one, Mr. Warden. Now, this template or whatever we're putting together, what's the difference between a licensed patio and a ice cream shop that wants to put a couple of bistro tables and a couple of chairs out in front of their business for people to just sit down while they're partaking in their ice cream? So is it all going to be tied together in one big knot, or is there going to be different classifications that a licensed patio is at a whole different level than someone wanting to put a picnic table out in front of a mom and pop restaurant or a couple of tables out in front of an ice cream shop?
Steve?
I have been focusing on the licensed requirement because those are the requests that we've received. I think that we may be able to use just permit for a small encroachment. Certainly the requirements of a in front of an ice cream shop would be much different than with respect to a licensed patio. So I think that we can accommodate the less sophisticated and risky activities with different levels.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, Julie, have we got a motion that we can attempt?
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Through to members of council, that the report and memo from the county solicitor be received, and that council consent to extending the temporary use of county road allowance for licensed patios, and that permit fees for this temporary use during the province's phase 2 of the reopening plan be waived, and that the county solicitor be directed to draft a formal agreement for the temporary use of county road allowance with local municipal partners, including recommendations and provisions presented in the attached memo, and further that the county CIO and county warden be directed to sign the agreement for the use of the county's road allowance.
Everyone happy with the motion?
Just one more clarification.
Go ahead, David.
As you mentioned the road allowance, that's certainly county's jurisdiction. If I heard you correct, Steve, that on the sidewalk is a municipal responsibility?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Good. So if say in West Elgin, if we have no impact on the county road, we're not putting people out on the county road allowance. It's again back to those simple tables out in front of a place of business. That is something that we would be able to handle within the.
Well, what I said was that the sidewalks are a municipal asset. It's still within the road allowance.
Okay, so you still need the permit from the county.
So you would still need some sort of permission or consent. But if you were simply, and if it's a sidewalk issue, but the first level of regulation for the sidewalk falls to the municipality.
Okay. So that be identified in the final documents get prepared for.
Any other questions or comments? Move and seconder for the motion then, please.
Moved by Martin.
Moved by Martin, seconder.
McPhail.
Second by McPhail, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yeah.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Anything else before we go into close? Need a mover and seconder. We're going to close with Municipal Act 239-2, a position, plan, procedure, criteria, or instruction to be applied to any negotiating carried on or to be carried on behalf of the municipality or local board parking space license agreement. Mover and seconder for that, please. Moved by Ketchabah, seconder.
French.
French, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Do we need a few minutes to go into closed?
Yes.
So we'll have about a 2-minute. Are we good? Okay, so I need to, mover and second to rise and report, please.
Purcell.
Moved by Purcell, seconder.
Martin.
Second by Martin, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Now we need a motion to adopt the recommendations of committee of the whole. Mover and seconder,
Sorry, we just have to do the motion for closed.
motion for close first?
Yes,
Okay. Have you got something?
I do.
Okay,
Thanks, Mr. Warden. For closed session item number 1, be it resolved that the report from staff be received and that staff proceed as directed and draft a bylaw for enactment at the July 14th, 2020 meeting.
mover and seconder, please.
Marks.
Moved by Mark, second by Jones, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Now, a motion to adopt the recommendations from committee of the whole, mover and seconder, please.
McPhail.
McPhail, second.
French.
Second by French, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Counselor Jiguer.
Yes.
Counselor Ketchabah.
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Bylaws, Julie?
Be it a first, second, and third read of bylaw 20-29, being a bylaw to confirm proceedings of the municipal council of the corporation of the county of Elgin at the June 23rd, 2020 meeting.
Mover and seconder, please.
Martin.
Moved by Martin, second by Jones, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Counselor Purcell.
Yes.
Counselor Martin.
Yes.
Counselor Marks.
Yes.
Counselor Jones.
Yes.
Counselor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer,
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah,
Yes.
Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Any other bylaws, Julie?
No.
Okay. Anything else before we adjourn? Seeing none, mover and seconder for adjournment, please.
French.
Jiguer.
Second by Jiguer, all in favor?
Deputy Warden McPhail.
Yes.
Councillor Purcell.
Yes.
Councillor Martin.
Yes.
Councillor Marks.
Yes.
Councillor Jones.
Yes.
Councillor French.
Yes.
Councillor Jiguer.
Yes.
Councillor Ketchabah.
Yes.
And Mr. Warden.
Yes,
9-0, the motion is carried.
thank you. Just a reminder, we have a rural initiatives at 1 o'clock and a terrace lodge at 2. So we will see those members after lunch. Take care, folks.
Okay.